Hello Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes. We probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. And I'm giving my quick reaction to episode 4 of The Rings of Power, The Great Wave. I'll be giving a more in-depth look at the episode, throwing out some Easter eggs later in the week with Paul. And I'll just say up front, of course, this episode, probably like every episode to come, broke with canon in a number of meaningful ways. The history and nature of the Palantiri, time compression, this group of Númenóreans being alive before the rings are forged, Miriel jailing Galadriel, Galadriel being on Númenor in the first place, etc. You get the idea. So, it's not canon. Let's just discuss what the show does portray. After a week's absence, we did get back to the Eregion Khazad-dûm storyline. The one I think has the best chance of providing something familiar to fans of the books. Though I'm disappointed at the lack of Celebrimbor so far in the first 4 episodes. He's gonna be central to the main plot, but if the show's even remotely like the lore, he's on a short timeline. Like, I wouldn't expect to see him in season 3. So I want more of that story here in season 1. Though we do see that time has passed. The dwarves have built a great deal of the Tower Forge that Celebrimbor requisitioned. A lot of folks have wondered aloud why he has to have the tower completed by spring. Is there perhaps someone lurking in the background requesting that timeline? On that note, I've been teetering like a pendulum each week on whether or not Halbrand is Sauron. This week, the pendulum definitely moved toward the yep side. I say that for 2 reasons. 1, Halbrand basically gives Sauron's mission statement while giving advice to Galadriel. He says, "You'll do well to identify what it is your opponent most fears. Give them a means of mastering it so that you can master them." That's what Sauron does with the 9 rings. He offers 9 men power over their rivals and enemies through the rings. But the wearers of those rings are ultimately under the control of his ring. And that's the tactic Sauron takes with Pharazôn. Pharazôn is aging. He fears dying. Sauron convinces him that the answer to immortality lies in turning against the Valar, worshipping Melkor. Eventually, Pharazôn decides to invade Aman, searching for a way to achieve immortality, and Sauron's enemy, Númenor, is destroyed. Hence, the Great Wave. The second reason the pendulum moved toward the Halbrand equals Sauron is the scene when Galadriel escapes. By the way, fire those 3 guards. Way too easy to lock them up. Oh, in here? Okay. But anyway, but that aside, in that scene, Pharazôn is debating whether or not to draw his sword on Galadriel. Halbrand says, "I wouldn't advise that." Pharazôn replies, "Well, I can't very well let her leave." And Halbrand responds, "You could if you knew exactly where she was going." That's the relationship between Sauron and Pharazôn in the lore. Sauron is Pharazôn's prisoner, but he dispenses useful information until he becomes Pharazôn's trusted advisor. Halbrand's in a cell, telling Pharazôn to simply catch Galadriel at Tar Palantir's tower. He could have lied and told Pharazôn the wrong info, but he doesn't. Galadriel finds a garrison of troops waiting for her. Halbrand is making himself useful to Pharazôn, so very Sauronish right now. After Nimloth starts shedding its petals, Miriel has a change of heart and decides to travel to Middle-earth with Galadriel and several troops. It's funny, it made me think Nimloth could be used as some kind of a governmental planning guide. So maybe we should make a treaty with the orcs? Nope, there are the petals. Never mind. Stick to the plan. Forget the orc thing. As for Miriel leaving, let's see if there's a scene next episode in which she puts Pharazôn in charge while she's gone. I think it's a fair bet to say that she'll have trouble getting control back once she returns. And this will start the Pharazôn kingship. Perhaps her father dies in her absence as well. Mount Doom gets name-dropped. Bronwyn mentions the name Orodruin. It hasn't become known as Mount Doom yet. The scene in which Arondir, Bronwyn, and Theo get saved by the sunlight, I think will be contrasted with a scene at the end of the season in which, after Mount Doom erupts, the ash filling the sky will allow the orcs to pillage freely. I liked getting the reminder of elven eyesight. What do your elf eyes see? Elrond sees Durin's conversation from afar. And while Elrond does come off as a good, kind, well-intentioned elf, one of the few such characters in the show, if I was Durin, I think I would have kicked him out of Gausa Doom. He's a spy sent by Celebrimbor. He eavesdrops on their conversation, figures out the secret password, enters a secret mine, all to figure out what the dwarves are hiding. He spins it like it's concern for Durin, and he does it believably when he's spying. Point to me. Last week, I mentioned a Yarendil and how Elrond would probably be looking up at his father in the night sky. And here, we got a nice monologue from Elrond on that subject. There are a few characters this episode revealing their relationships with their fathers. Elrond, Prince Durin, Miriel, Isildur, Kemen, and of course we got to meet the character known as Father, the elf Adar. His background is still a mystery, though we know a bit more about him. We know he was in Beleriand in the First Age. Though the show hasn't spelled it out, Beleriand sank into the sea after the First Age. Hence, it's not around anymore. Adar asks Arondir if he was born by the mouth of the river. And then he says, I went down that river once when I was young. I remember the banks were covered in sage blossoms, miles of them. Obviously, there were many rivers in Beleriand, but the mouth of the river strongly suggests the mouths of the river Sirion. That's notable because it's where many of the surviving elves sought refuge during the First Age, the havens of Sirion. Since he only went down that river once, it suggests he didn't live in the havens of Sirion. He says, when I was young. What's young for an elf? I'm not sure. If he was a kid, that means he was born in Beleriand instead of being born in Aman like the rest of the exiled Noldor. Let's assume he means before I became disfigured, before the War of Wrath, before Beleriand disappeared. Again, caveat, the show isn't beholden to canon and probably doesn't have rights to any of the theoried identities for Adar. But I'll say that my theory that he could be some version of Maglor looks better after this episode. Pendulum. He's wearing a glove on one hand, suggesting it's been injured. Maglor's hand was burned by a Silmaril, causing him to throw it into the sea out of his pain. Maglor did not live at the Havens of Sirion, but he did notably visit it once, along with his brothers as they enacted the third kinslaying. What's interesting there is that he subsequently raised, for a time, the twin children he thought he'd orphaned, Elrond and Elros. And we're told, quote, love grew after between them. So there was a bond between Elrond and Maglor. So it seems fortuitous that the same episode Elrond talks about his father, we hear from another elf named Father who may also have a father-son relationship with Elrond. So there you go. Maglor confirmed. Okay, no, maybe not. But in any case, those are my thoughts from the episode. I'll be back with Paul doing a deeper dive later this week. Thanks, everybody, and I'll see you next time.